What's up guys, welcome to The Far Side. My name is Migs. This is my breakdown of The Last of Us Episode 2, a decent entry into the season thus far. Just like the first episode, it continues to have similarities with the game, but also has some noticeable changes as well. Some scenes ripped directly from key moments in the game, and we're here to discuss them, including some of the Easter eggs you might have missed. So if you haven't gotten the chance to watch the episode, careful for spoilers. But let's get into this. Let's go. This episode's runtime is just shy of an hour, which is the shortest so far, especially with the long runtime of the first one, clocking in at around 81 minutes. But before anything else, we have to discuss what seems to be a commonality between these two episodes, where they show us a prelude to the cordyceps outbreak. Instead of a few decades back, we are thrown to 2003. This isn't part of the original game, it's sort of an expansion for the show. I think they're trying to show there wasn't any change from 1986 up until 2003 in the way the scientific community view cordyceps to be a non-threat to humanity, which is the real reason it kinda snuck up on the world since they're completely unaware of it. This picks up the initial news we hear of the infection starting from Jakarta in episode 1. It gives the illusion of this problem being so far away, like on the opposite side of the world, giving us a false sense of security. So the very first scene, we see a couple of military personnel take away a professor of mycology to look at some samples, and it turns out it's from a human. And here we see that she was kind of in shock because they know that cordyceps only resides in insects, not in humans, but turns out there was a sample taken from a human being who was attacked from a flour factory. In a later scene, she says that the flour and other grains are perfect substrates, and that's how the first of the humans got infected. So on top of the cordyceps spreading through tendrils, which is of course changed from spores, you can speculate that grains and flours might have also contributed to the outbreak. Grains are among the top foods consumed throughout the world, so it makes sense it could have also spread through their distribution. But of course, she's very skeptical that it's all true, so they show her basically patient zero. She sees that it is indeed cordyceps taking over their body. I don't know about you, but that's some imagery. It creeps me out, especially towards the end with that kiss. I really miss the spores so much at this point. We know that was a decision made to avoid prolonged scenes with the gas mask covering actors' faces, but basically I prefer that. Aside from being realistic, it just has a way of making you feel helpless being all around you. So naturally, the military asks her, being the expert, what they can do to stop the spread of this, and she says what John Hannah's scientist character says in episode 1, that is, it can't be stopped. There's no cure, there's no vaccine for it. The only way for them to contain it is to nuke the entire city. And the scene ends with her just asking to go to her family. She knows everyone in the city is basically doomed. Next scene, we see Ellie sleeping in the middle of some vegetation, and I like the way she's framed here. It's like humanity is at the center of nature and we can survive and basically cohabitate with nature. She wakes up with Joel and Tess looking at her, waiting for her to just explode or something, maybe just go in a rampage, having learned from the last episode that she's positive for infection using that scanner thing that turns red. They ask her a couple of questions, but since she's being dodgy, Tess directly asks her why she's so important to Marlene, which is the Firefly leader. We learned that Tess and Joel are not good people at this point. They've done things they're not proud of, basically doing anything they can to survive, which is a common theme in most post-apocalyptic shows, is that people turn to the dark side in order to get by. More importantly, this plays into what happens later in the episode. I also noticed that Ellie is in a spotlight throughout the scene, which highlights her being interrogated by Tess and Joel. So Ellie tells them that they think they can make a vaccine out of her immunity, and there's a Firefly base out west that's working on a cure. Joel is very skeptical about it, saying it's always been the narrative, but it never turns out to be true. Tess tells them that she is a means to an end, and when they eventually hand her over to the Fireflies, they can get what they want, which is of course some supplies and a working vehicle, so they can look for Tommy somewhere out in Wyoming. Right after they go out, I'm not sure if you noticed the door sounding like a clicker, which foreshadows an encounter with those later on. Outside, we can see the post-apocalyptic landscape in broad daylight. Ellie has never seen this before, so she takes it all in. You can kind of see the two tall buildings leaning into each other in the distance, just like in episode 1, and I think they do justice on how the world would look in a scenario like this. Overgrowth permeating almost everything, like within broken buildings. Wildlife has taken over some places, and it really looks looks good. They also find a crater that was left during the bombing around the Boston quarantine zone. Tess mentions it didn't work in other places, but apparently it worked in Boston. If you haven't noticed, Tess takes focus in this episode. As I said, they have done some things, and for her, at least this would become her moment of redemption. We get a little taste of how Ellie was bitten as well. It turns out she was infected inside the quarantine zone in a forbidden mall. It was off limits and boarded up, of course, but Ellie snuck in out of curiosity. The thing is, Ellie didn't actually tell her the entire story, and I believe we'll have an episode where we see what happens within the season. In the game, they dedicated an entire DLC titled Left Behind. I'm not going to go into it, but this is just to answer how was she bitten in the first place. As they walk through the abandoned landscape, Ellie is surprised that they don't encounter that much infected outside of the QZ, saying that rumor is that it was swarming with the infected. She continues that there's also some talk about super infected, and she basically describes different stages of the infection. So there are stages of infection for the cordyceps fungus. The first stage of infection are called runners, because unlike slow zombies of other IPs, they bum rush you. They've only been infected recently, so there aren't many physical manifestations of the infection. The next stage are called stalkers. As the name implies, they don't run towards their enemy, but instead hide and try to ambush them. There might be one of them later in the episode. We'll talk about it then. This can be a few weeks up to a year of infection, but the third stage are called clickers, which is what Ellie was referring to when she says a split open head and blind as a bat. The cordyceps fungus has evolved to a point where mushrooms basically pop out of their heads, rendering them blind. They use clicking noises as sort of echolocation to find their prey. And the fourth stage are called bloaters. They've been infected the longest. That's what Ellie was referring to when she says there are infected that explode with fungus spores. As their name implies, their bodies look bloated. They're very strong and very hard to kill. There are other stages that have popped up in the second game, but these are the main ones. When the fungus fully takes over the body, they spread spores all throughout the area of where they died, at least in the game, but here I guess they just sprout. So they decided to scout the shortest path to the state house where Ellie's supposed to meet up with the Fireflies, and this is where it kind of deviates from the game. Originally, you have to cross the wreckage of the two buildings that have been shown twice now in live action. In the game, they encounter a lot of the infected there, and I actually prefer to see them traverse the interior of this derelict building. It was kind of iconic to me playing the game for the first time, and it would have made for a lot of cool scenes. In the show, they go straight to the museum. Maybe they wanted to combine locations that are functionally the same, otherwise it'll be just one building after the other, and they might end up increasing their budget unnecessarily. But before we dive into the museum part, I just wanted to discuss the infected, or more appropriately, the lack thereof. While it is true that there are few of them here than say a full-on zombie apocalypse movie, it would have been nice if they encounter more runners. It would have added to the atmosphere of them being in danger, of being outside of the quarantine zone. Random encounters with a couple of infected would have added to the tension, but I digress. So they end up in this hotel. It's flooded and it looks like a swamp, absolutely teeming with wildlife. We do have a cool Easter egg here as well of Ellie saying that she can't swim. This would have come into play later on in the series, so put a pin on that. Joel kind of clowns on her about being afraid of the ankle-deep pool, which is an interesting take to their initial relationship in the game. It wasn't that hostile, or at least Joel wasn't outwardly being mean to her.
You're a weird kid.
You're a weird kid.
In the game, he was skeptical of the entire mission, but it was more towards Tess and how she has fallen into this Firefly mission. He doesn't want to take the risk, especially if they don't know anything about it, let alone believe it. To be honest, I kind of prefer the game version of their relationship because after all his reservations about the mission, somehow he comes to care for Ellie and eventually forms a paternal bond with her. But I do like Bella Ramsey and Pedro Pascal's portrayal of these characters, don't get me wrong. I'm not ready to write them off just yet. It's just a different take is what I'm saying. You do get more of their interaction here. When Tess goes off scene, Ellie asks Joel a couple of questions, and we're just told that Joel is basically a closed book at this point. So when Tess comes back, they were able to go up top and check out their way across, which turns out to be absolutely crawling with the infected. Tess tells Ellie that the infected are all connected via underground tendrils, like a mycelial network. We do see that play out in the scene where Joel shoots an infected in the state house and alarms the entire horde outside. But going back to this scene, they decide to take a different route and go to the museum. museum. Joel checks if the fungi covering the door are dead, which apparently would mean those inside would also be dead. I'm not sure if that tracks. In any case, this might be a callback to a scene in the game of Joel removing a clicker off of a door. So they go into the museum and they see a fresh body, which could mean that something other than a runner is inside the building. Apparently they know it might be a clicker, as we see both of them exchanging dark looks. You know, the next phase of being infected where you have a mushroom for a face? Yeah, that one. They usually stay quiet and tell Ellie to do the same. They push forward inside the building. I like how they built the tension in the whole museum scene. Horrible clicking noises slowly building up to their discovery was really top notch. This entire thing is really well shot and well done. We get a close-up scene of the clickers here. You can see their faces have exploded into that large mushroom sprouts that we've been talking before. When Ellie sees it, she gasps, so the clicker senses her through echolocation, so Joel has no choice but to start shooting. In the game, they pretty much try to avoid these guys and run away as much as possible because finding them 1v1 is absolutely insane. They are extremely hard to kill. They end up getting separated. Joel cleverly throws a bust into some glass to distract it, which is also a part of the game. You can throw bottles somewhere else and it would follow that noise instead. Obviously, this is where amongst the struggles with the clickers, Tess gets bitten. We just don't see it happen as in the game. Ellie also gets bitten as well. Joel says that maybe the first bite didn't take, but this one will, showing him doubling down on his whole disbelief in Ellie's immunity. Tess, on the other hand, seems to have realized Ellie's importance, having been bitten and seeing her own mortality close at hand. She wants to help Ellie in any way she can. She has this drive that Joel might not see at this exact moment, other than right before she says it to his face towards the end, and even that might be because she's dying. He knows it's her last words, but later on this will have more significance for him as he bonds with Ellie. We also get the rooftop scene of Joel and Ellie pulled straight from the game. They're looking at the old state house in the distance. We get the initial foundational elements of their relationship here. Joel looks at Ellie and then looks at his watch, thinking of Sarah, indicating she reminds him of her. Then this takes us to the old state house. Inside, they learn the entire Firefly team has been eliminated. One of their members got infected. The healthy ones fought the sick ones, but as Joel puts it, everyone lost. And you can kind of feel the urgency for Tess to find out where to bring Ellie as she frantically searches the place. He wants to know where to bring her before time runs out. From the behind the scenes, we also know that Anna Torv, who plays Tess here, says that if she can do this one thing that can potentially save everyone, then in one way she may be redeemed for all the crappy things she's done before. And it plays really well into their persona, where they have to do pretty much anything to survive. This is her kind of coming into terms with what she's done in her life and trying to do one thing before time runs out. This scene is different in the game in that it's not Fedra soldiers that are coming in to wipe them out, but to me it's not that significant of a change in terms of the story. I think it is not that big of a deviation because the essential story elements are still there and they haven't been altered in a very significant way. And I think it's more about the moment where Tess holds Joel responsible for Ellie. Joel shoots an infected right after. This triggers the mycelial network, alerting the horde outside of their presence inside the old state house. I might be wrong, but this one with half-infected face looks like a stalker. Towards the end, Tess stays behind to give them some time to get away. She tosses the fuel on the ground, but she struggles with the lighter. To be honest, it would have been pretty easy to blow up the place considering there's like a gazillion grenades on the floor, but I guess this way it's more suspenseful. Not sure why they have to include the super gross tendril kiss, to be honest, unless they're trying to do something out of that later on. But in the end, she is successful and the building explodes, killing the infected. On the very last shot of Ellie, the framing is of her all alone, which may indicate how she feels at this moment. Most of the episode has been about Tess and her trying to, I think they also build some kind of rapport. She hasn't made any with Joel. Now she's stuck with him, who's kind of been an asshole this entire time, and that is the end of episode 2. So again, I really still think this is a pretty decent episode considering the changes. I prefer some of the original scenes. As I said, I think they should have really done something inside of the giant buildings. They've been teasing for 2 episodes now because they teased it pretty heavily, but they ended up not doing anything about it. Also, hopefully we get to see more of the infected, and I know the showrunners have said this is more of an exploration of the characters, their relationships, and how they cope with this entire situation. But there are good things in this episode. I love the clicker scene and the tension they've built with the creatures within this universe. I'm really looking forward to seeing more of it. But that's it for me, guys. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know what you guys think about the episode down in the comments below. Like and subscribe if you haven't already. It would really help the channel out. Take care of there and see you on the next one.